So if you guys are not aware, by going into the side story and going to Moonlight Theater, if you click on Fallen Land and actually go into here and watch through all these seasons by completing all these acts, very easy, it's just a story, you can actually auto through it and also play some small battles. Not only will you get a ton of free Mystic medals, but you'll also actually unlock a Moonlight recruitment for a free Moonlight 5-star out of a list of 7. The units you can choose from will be featuring Sylvan Sage Vivian, also Death Dealer Ray. You're also going to see something like Remnant Violet available, Commander Pavel, Astromancer Elena, Meteor Carrick. There's also going to be Commander Lilius, if I can actually find her. Yes. So you have 7 units to choose from. Very easy. Just go into the Fallen Land in Moonlight Theater and just complete these acts. You can get these theater tickets to actually complete the acts with gold, so it will actually cost you some gold, but it is a free Moonlight 5-star unit that you definitely want to get because some of them are very powerful and something you want to rush for. And also because, yeah, it's just a free Moonlight 5-star, and gold is easily farmable as you play through the game a lot and progress into the mid and late game. So this is the tier list that we have for the current state of the game. It is updated. We did make one on the release of this Moonlight Blessing, but because of the fact that there have been some meta shifts and some buffs to some units, we actually changed it up a bit and actually updated it. So we have 3 tiers here. Top tier, we have the decent tier, and we also have the not worth it tier. Now all these units are pretty decent. Even the ones at the bottom here, they're going to be good in their niche, which we'll talk about. But we're going to be ranking these units based on their overall power for mostly PvP, but also we're going to factor in some PvE as well. So at the top of the top, we still have Conquer Lilius. Very good in PvE, especially for Ancient Inheritance and Hall of Trials. Also very good in PvP, you see her all the time. Even though there's some counters out now that they released, such as Moon Bunny Dominion's buff, and just other units in general, like Zio. The thing is, she's still very good against like pretty much most of the game, like the units in the game, and she's just very strong. Even against her counters, she can do decently well because all 3 of her skills are super powerful. She's decently bulky and she has very high base speed. And yeah, she's just a very powerful unit. Still think she's the best of the best. You'll get a ton of value for her basically through the entire game, even in the early game, because she still is very good in PvE. And in PvP, even in the early game, you'll find a lot of success with her. Next, we have the buffed Death Dealer Ray. So before his buffs, he was actually like down here, but after his buffs, he's amazing. He has an AoE sleep on his S3, he has a ton of injuries, which makes him very good against health scaling bruisers, which there are a ton of, and he also does a crap ton of damage with his Venom effect. So what he does is his S1, if he attacks the unit with the Venom, it does more damage. It's pretty crazy. Not Venom, but injuries. So he does more damage against injured units, and he has a ton of injuries himself. So he's very good against health scaling bruisers. Also very good into Laya currently because she's a health scaling bruiser, right? Not really a bruiser, but I guess a support unit. But she hits very hard with her S3, and Death Dealer Ray will mitigate pretty much all of that damage just by landing his Venoms and landing some injuries, and also will be able to actually one-shot her eventually. So these two are going to the top of the top. I think Conquer Lilius is a little bit better because she is better for PvE, but Death Dealer Ray, still very strong. He is pretty much overpowered, I'd say, borderline overpowered, because he is super powerful. The only really counters to her are going to be like Savior Aiden and some cleansers, but for the most part, he's a very safe pick to pick early as long as you take away Savior Aiden or actually ban it. Next up, we have the decent tier. So these units are still pretty good, but just not as flexible as the top tier units. Meteor Carrick here used to be somewhere around here. Some people even ranked him number 1 in the past. I had him personally at number 2. But now we have him at the number 3 spot, or the top of top decent tier, and that is because the meta just doesn't favor him, right? He gets hard countered by cooldown pushbacks such as like Noggle and Lua. He also gets hard countered by Savior Aiden because she does a ton of damage to him. She can almost pretty much one-shot him if you don't have Aureus or Adamant Shield, and he is just really slow, so he gets countered pretty hard by Cleave. Any units that go fast, like Strays, Architect Lyca, Rand comps, and stuff like that, he will just fall over and die, and not really do much to support the team. But he's still very good against, you know, Angel of Light, Angelica, and also some other debuffers. But it really feels like his cleansing role is just outshined by other units like Laya, Ocean Breeze Luluka, and they don't have as many glaring weaknesses as Meteor Carrick. He's still very good, but against 2 debuff turn teams or openers, he's very bad, and there's some of them coming out, right? So you have to be very careful of using him. But still a decent unit, I'd say, and still very powerful, just not as powerful and universal as the top tier picks. In RTN World Arena, the pretty much staple endgame content for PvP, Conquer Lilius and Death Dealer Ray are going to be picked very early, very frequently, whereas Meteor Carrick, you can't really pick him that early because kind of risky in your draft, and you're kind of risking to get speed contested, cleave down, or just they're not going to pick any debuffers that he's good against, or even if they do, they can play around it, because Meteor Coward kind of just ends up sitting there for a lot of the time, especially against his arch rival Angel of Light Angelica. And honestly, Angel of Light's S2 is just honestly a little bit better than Meteor Coward if you can proc it a lot. So you're going to get into this like limbo where he kind of just does nothing. Still a good unit though, I think he's pretty fun, but just not a good meta for him. I think when the meta changes a little bit more to, you know, less aggression, he might be a good unit. Next, we have Remnant Violet. So this unit on a good day, top tier. On a bad day, not worth it, right? Very RNG heavy. If he dodges, you'll pretty much win because he has a ton of damage with his counterattacks. If you have him on a counterattacking evasion artifact, I think it's called Decrescent, right? Double-edged Decrescent. Also a ton of sustain if you put him on Lifesteal. He's pretty bulky as well if you put him on good gear. And his S3, of course, hits like a truck. You can one-shot a ton of units with it, or pretty much almost one-shot him. And he penetrates defense, making it very good into teams that don't do a lot of damage, right? So if you're against like tanky teams that are there to wear you down and not really burst you, Remnant Violet can be very, very good as long as he dodges. So dodging is, or evading is his main thing, but if you don't evade, you kind of just lose, right? And that's why he does have some pretty hard counters, right? Sleep actually makes it so you can't evade anymore, so Death Dealer is very good against him. You also see like Zahhak or Briar Witchessaria who have built-in hit chance, making them very powerful against Remnant Violet. They can just one-shot him. Zahhak can, Briar Witchessaria just defense breaks him and strips his evasion, which is pretty much making him dead. So you have to be very careful about picking him, but he's very fun in Guild Wars offense and can be picked actually in World Arena. I actually like picking him a lot. There's a situation where you need a damage dealer, you don't know what to pick. Remnant Violet is pretty much going to be a solid choice almost like 80-90% of the time, as long as they don't have, you know, ways to strip your evasion. Next, we have the Not Worth It tier. So these units, like I mentioned, they're still pretty decent, but they're going to have more of a niche role. So we're going to talk about that. Commander Pavel, going to be used primarily in Cleave. He needs crits to activate his S2 to push him up so he can S3 and one-shot something. The thing is, there's a lot of anti-crit in the meta, right? You have units like Navy Captain Landy, of course, always in the meta, which kind of shut him down and kind of pushed him out of the meta for cleavers even. But if you can actually pick him into a comp that doesn't have crit hit resistance, he's still pretty good if you're cleaving. If you don't like cleaving, you don't like going super fast and winning in the first turn, you don't have god tier speed gear that puts you at like 320 speed on your Ran or something, probably not for you. So it's going to be good for a small population, which is why I have him in the Not Worth It tier. Next, we have Astromancer Elena, also a very good cleave or speed heavy unit. Just because of the fact that she can prevent counterattacks. If you pair her with, you know, Commander Pavel, for example, and like Ran, what she can do is stop the enemy team from countering altogether. If you fight like Bellions, Navy Captain Landys, Abyssal Athenes, they can't actually counter you, even like Savior Aiden, so it makes her very good. The only thing is there's going to be better units you can pick than her into Cleave, or with Cleave, I'd say. And for the most part, you're only going to pick her into, you know, counter heavy teams, and because of that, she's not going to really get too much value. You can only pick her with Cleave as well. If you pick her in a standard comp, she doesn't do enough damage, and she's very squishy because she's a ranger, which makes her very awkward to pick. So for that reason, we have her in the Not Worth It tier. I think both these units are good for cleavers, with Commander Pavel being a little bit better. Maybe Astromancer Elena if you're struggling against counter teams, but I think they're pretty similar in their power level. Next, we have Sylvan Sage Vivian. So Sylvan Sage Vivian, honestly on paper, she looks like a pretty solid DPS unit. She has a ton of AoE damage, she has self-sustain, she has damage mitigation for herself with her S2 passive, and she also has crit hit damage buff, right, which is very good. The only thing is, she gets cucked very hard by Rimuru, Karina, Rocket Punch Gauntlet, anything with fixed damage, and that's because her damage mitigation doesn't work against fixed damage, and you usually build her pretty squishy. So Karina's S3, Ramire's S3 will typically one-shot her, which makes her very hard to actually play. And she's also very weak against debuffs because she doesn't have any built-in immunity or ways to cleanse herself, which makes her pretty hard to pick in the current meta. Also, she has built-in AoE, and that can be bad in a lot of situations. Right now, it's pretty hard to play AoE because you have like Bellion, Abyssal Athene, Navy Captain Landy, who all are waiting there to counterattack, so you have to be very careful with your AoEs. And even like Last Rider Crow and Knight, who doesn't counterattack, has that, you know, S3 that's going to be reset. So you have to be very careful picking her. I can even go even further. Lone Crescent Bologna is very good against her as well because you can just proc her counter over and over. So you have to be very careful playing her, like I said. But I think she's a solid unit on paper, but in the current meta and how she actually works with her damage mitigation, it makes her hard to pick. you can only really pick her as a last pick where they can't actually freely counter her, because, you know, otherwise they'll just pick, you know, Mirror Karina together and just leave her up and win RTA World Arena, and you're pretty screwed. However, in Guild Wars, she can be a solid dark bait unit. You can pick her into APOC Robbies and she can tank her pretty well. But otherwise, you know, not really worth it. There's a lot of units that are good for Guild Wars, so I wouldn't say pick a unit solely for Guild Wars. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this Fallen Lands Moonlight Blessing tier list. Had to update it because, you know, Death to Array was shaking up the meta for such a long time, and I kind of forgot to update this. And a lot of people have been asking about Moonlight Blessings, Celestial Summons in my Discord, so yeah, we just have been actually updating our tier list. So hopefully you guys found this video helpful. If you guys have any disagreements, let me in the comments down below what you think should be changed on this tier list, and I will see you guys next video.